So you have heard this president in his State of the Union speech last night. And what I've tried to do here is take excerpts from the speech about key points that was actually conveyed, not just what it claimed. And one of the things that people have been talking about is, why did the president do this speech at this time? Well, as you can see, his poll numbers are dropping precipitously. If you look at the recent completed races not too long ago in Virginia, governor's race, in New Jersey, you saw where, even though these are more blue states, where the individuals who won on Democrat side did much better than expected, at least compared to Trump's numbers when he ran against Kamala Harris. And in the special election in Tennessee more recently, you see the blue and Democrats did much better than anticipated. So in that sense, there's a sense of urgency, I think, on the Republican side to really get out the president's message, given the midterms coming up in next November. What stood out to me mostly in terms of this speech wasn't the conveyance of power or confidence. It was more urgency. I didn't see a confident, commanding president delivering a speech from a position of calm authority. I saw someone extremely focused but rushed. The pace was fast. The transitions were abrupt. I felt he was trying to get a lot in a short period of time. Not sure what the driver was for that. Maybe it was an agreement they had with the media outlets about the timeline involved, but it seemed like a very rushed speech.
In America, 11 months ago, I inherited a mess, and I'm fixing it. When I took office, inflation was the worst in 48 years, and some would say in the history of our country, which caused prices to be higher than ever before, making life unaffordable for millions and millions of Americans. This happened during a Democrat administration, and it's when we first began hearing the word affordability. Our border was open, and because of this, our country was being invaded by an army of 25 million people, many who came from prisons and jails, mental institutions, and insane asylums. Let's look at the facts. Under the Biden administration, car prices rose 22%, and in many states, 30% or more. Gasoline rose 30 to 50%. Hotel rates rose 37%. Airfares rose 31%. Now, under our leadership, they are all coming down and coming down fast. The price of a Thanksgiving turkey was down 33% compared to the Biden last year. The price of eggs is down 82% since March, and everything else is falling rapidly. And it's not done yet. Already, I've secured a record-breaking $18 trillion of investment into the United States, which means jobs, wage increases, growth, factory openings, and far greater national security. Much of this success has been accomplished by tariffs. My favorite word, tariffs, which for many decades have been used successfully by other countries against us, but not anymore. Companies know that if they build in America, there are no tariffs, and that's why they're coming home to the USA in record numbers. They're building factories and plants at levels we haven't seen. I'm doing what no politician of either party has ever done, standing up to the special interests to dramatically reduce the price of prescription drugs. I negotiated directly with the drug companies and foreign nations, which were taking advantage of our country for many decades, to slash prices on drugs and pharmaceuticals by as much as 400, 500, and even 600%. The drugs have only gone up, but now they'll be going down by numbers never conceived possible. It's called most favored nation, and no president has ever had the courage or ability to get this done until now. Gasoline is now under $2.50 a gallon in much of the country. In some states, it, by the way, just hit $1.99 a gallon. The Democrat inflation disaster, again, the worst in the history of our country. Look at Minnesota, where Somalians have taken over the economics of the state and have stolen billions and billions of dollars from Minnesota and indeed from the United States of America. And we're going to put an end to it. For so long as before my election, the vast majority of good and decent Americans were forced to watch as corrupt politicians plundered the halls of power. exploited our taxpayers, and pillaged every system that makes civilized society function. But not anymore, and you see that every day.
You heard excerpts from the speech, sort of pulled out some of the key components of that speech. Now, we're going to do what this speech did not do consistently: match the claims with reality. I'll give credit where it's due, but I'm going to be surgical about the exaggeration. Because to me, when you're speaking as the president from the White House, credibility is paramount. It's basically the entire game. Let's go to the point of inflation. He said he inherited catastrophic inflation. Now, I'll be fair. Inflation was much worse in years earlier, in the middle of the pandemic, 2022, up to 9%. But he took office in January 2025, where inflation hovered around, say, 2.93 plus percent. So inflation was nowhere near its peak during the pandemic when he took office. Inflation today, the last number that came out, I think it was yesterday, was about 2.7% year over year for the latest CPI release. The timeline does not align with his framing. If you've got progress, you don't need to overset it or exaggerate it. Going back to that whole 9% in mid 2022 as the basis for the comparison is not a good look. You have to stay on point to say you've improved, stabilized, improved inflation. You don't have to over exaggerate. Gas prices. Gas prices will tell a similar story to the story provided on inflation. The national average today is probably around $3 per gallon, depending on what tracker you're using. You can find $1.99 possibly in certain specific locations, typically those low tax states in short-term discount zones. But in our tax states, New York, California, New Jersey, I dare you to go find $1.99 per gallon tax prices. So when you highlight the $1.99 as a national achievement, it's overrepresentation. It's not reflective of reality. And people know that who live in the states where they're paying much higher prices. Now, his perspective on the border. On the border, I'll give credit first. The CPB has publicly touted 7 straight months of zero releases under their definition. That means people coming to the country being released from coming across the border. But 25 million invaded is not supported in the speech with credible sourcing. And zero allowed in is not the same as zero releases. Those are two different claims. In fact, the number of people who come across the border, the 25 million number has been mentioned to us, is somewhere between 10 and 14 million. So use those numbers to exaggerate and probably create fear and to show how great you have done is not reflective of reality. Now tariffs, because he treats tariffs as if it's a magic money machine. Here are the basics. Tariffs are taxes collected at the border and billed to US importers, not to foreign countries. And after that, the importer may try to push the costs onto the foreign suppliers, absorb it, or pass it on to consumers. But the foreigners pay line is not how tariffs work in practice. And the president keeps saying this as if the tariffs are paid by the country from who we import goods from. So when he argues tariffs are funding prosperity, the question is at what cost and to whom? Tariffs can encourage reshoring in some cases, but it can also raise input costs for US businesses and definitely raise price for consumers. He also paid a record-breaking $18 trillion in investments connected to his tariff policies. But major fact-checking has noted he hasn't provided evidence that he personally secured that amount. And it appears really speculative and exaggerated. And in fact, some people have said some of the numbers he's mentioned in terms of investment were numbers that are brought over from the Biden administration. If you want tariffs, there are two, not a miracle, and somebody here pays. People sit on both sides of the tariff fence. Some people think they're great. Other people think they contribute to inflation. They're not a good thing, and consumers eventually pays. Now let's go to drug prices that he talked about. He claimed drug prices were cut 400, 500, even in some instances, 600%. That is mathematically impossible. 100% cut in drug prices means it's down to zero. Anything after that means you're giving back to the purchaser, the consumer who's purchasing the goods. When you break arithmetic, you break trust. People can then see you're not only exaggerating, you're going beyond that. You're actually being somewhat disingenuous just to make a point and to show how great you have done. So what will likely happen? What likely happened? Why he's come up with these numbers? He's probably trying to describe a very large price cut. I'll compare US list prices to lower internationally referenced prices, or using the most favored nation style framing, but use a percentage that makes the claim unserious. And when you're talking about healthcare, something that affects people's lives significantly, it's a life and death issue. You can't play games with the numbers, not if you want credibility. And we see how much has been happening across our country in terms of the prices, the premium you pay, expect to go up in January. It's a concern. So don't inflate the numbers. The president has been marketing that he has ended 8 wars. And frankly, the only war I know of that is ended is the war in the Middle East between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And even that is a peace, which is always a challenge. And today may restart tomorrow. Overclaiming turns diplomacy into marketing. Nothing wrong with the president taking claim for really his diplomacy, but the claim he have actually ended 8 wars is not a good look. It affects the credibility. And when you're trying to market this and sell this, it doesn't resonate with the public. We're trying to figure out what are those 8 wars that you've ended. Now the Somali claim. If there's fraud in Minnesota, prosecute individuals. But blaming Somalians broadly is scapegoating. And using terms like $1 billion being defrauded, when it's more in some have claimed in the hundreds of millions, it's not billions, it's just being plain disingenuous. That's racial signaling, and it's unnecessary. He could have argued accountability without targeting a specific community. But it goes back to this whole race baiting again. Because he has his base, and he wants his base to be fired up and being inflamed by any suggestion that corruption is significant in an immigrant community. Now, what about the whole issue of corruption? Because he talks a lot about corruption and blames the Democrats for a lot of this corruption. Here's the bigger issue when it comes to corruption and credibility. He condemns corruption, but the public also sees clear double standards. There's no tradition of voluntary transparency on taxes, as he has a long history of not disclosing his own tax returns, breaking with modern presidential norms in this area. Talk about foreign influence and the optics surrounding this. Let's think about the Qatar jet controversy. He was going to get a plane from Qatar for about cost about $400 million, and he was all gung ho to get this. Don't you think that's some element of corruption there? And what about his family and his inner circle, especially around the transactions and businesses they do with the Middle East? Tough talk for certain parties or certain groups when it comes to corruption, not the same when it comes to his family members and his associates. And here's another point. He talks about drugs and his fight against drugs. And we see what happened at sea with the individuals who were unlived at sea, is about 80 plus now, because he's trying to fight drugs, and drugs are a scourge and a poison on the American citizens. And yet he pardoned the former president of Honduras, who was known to be one who facilitated or oversaw the exportation of 400 tons of drugs to the US. This person was pardoned. So you can talk about corruption. If you're truly anti-corruption, you just don't demand investigation of enemies. You demonstrate that your own circle is held to the same standard. Oh, and I forgot to mention the crypto king, who he also pardoned, and his family is involved in crypto business. When the public sees allegations around insiders and sees no visible accountability, when you talk about corruption and you want to get rid of corruption, but then you pardon the crypto king, you pardon the Honduran president, one of your czars in your chief czar that's fighting illegal immigration, when he was caught in a sting, allegedly got paid $50,000 and nothing is done about it. How can they take you seriously when you say you're trying to fight corruption? So here's my bottom line. There are areas where results may be real, border operations, some economic cooling as related to inflation, diplomatic engagement as related to Gaza and the Middle East. I'll acknowledge that, even though some of the numbers in there are exaggerated in terms of 8 wars or 25 million coming across the border versus 11. And frankly, some would just say that's the president just exaggerating, but there's substance to what he's saying. That may be true in some respects, but it's hard for your leader to have credibility and to be believable if they go off the rail and just exaggerate numbers, which doesn't align with reality. It's what makes people stop trusting the numbers and the person who delivers the numbers. Credibility, frankly, is finite. Once it's strained this hard, rebuilding it becomes very difficult. And this president has a history of exaggeration. Thanks for being here. I appreciate you being here. Love to hear from you. So provide feedback in the comments. Now, do me a favor. If you have not done so already, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Peace out.